Chapter 26 of Tilda Jane's Orphans. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Brandon. Tilda Jane's Orphans by Marshall Saunders. Chapter 26. A Cottage of Gentility. One evening, 3 weeks after Perletta had been boarding in the Dilson family, Grandpa announced his intention of going for a drive. "I'm sorry, Dad. I can't take you," said Hank. "There's a fellow coming to see me soon after supper, and I said I'd be around the barn somewhere." "I can drive myself," said Grandpa stoutly. "You can, but you can't," replied Hank mildly. "Do you think I'd trust you to those rheumatic hands in case of an accident? No, sir. You're too valuable yet to lose. You'll have to take one of the girls." Grandpa looked first at Tilda Jane, then at Perletta. He would rather have the little girl, but the big girl was a better driver and was stronger to hold in the powerful milkweed. "Perletta," he said shortly, "you will go with me." Hank winked at Poacher, who at the mention of a drive had stood on his hind legs and was pawing the young man's chest. "Dad's a funny fellow, isn't he?" he said in the dog's ear. "Orders a boarder round like a coachman, and the boarder don't mind. Come on, help me harness." When Grandpa and Perletta drove down the road half an hour later, in Hank's neat black buggy with Handy Andy tucked in between them and Poacher running behind, Hank turned to Tilda Jane with one of his explosive laughs. "Isn't that Dad a great case? 'Pon my word, I believe he's getting fond of Perletta." Tilda Jane's eyes were twinkling. "Does money always make a difference?" she asked. "I mean, does it always make folks nice?" "I guess usually it makes them harder," he said. "But certainly, in Perletta's case, it has toned her down wonderful. She don't see a fight now unless it hugs her so tight she can't get away from it. She doesn't seem so ugly looking either," said the little girl, pausing in her occupation of washing out cup towels to gaze thoughtfully at the sunny western sky. "It's her expression that has changed," said Hank. "When she used to roll out that under lip, she was a sight. I say, Sissy, you'll worry those things all to rags, scrubbing them like that. Hang the things out on the line and come sit down and look at the new house." "Very well," she said laconically, and hanging out her towels and carefully pouring the soapy water on some nasturtiums planted in a tub to keep them out of Handy Andy's way, she followed Hank to a seat on the small grass plot in front of their new house. The frame was up now and boarded in. The carpenters were doing their work faithfully, and Hank never tired in his minute supervision of every detail. "It's going to be a pretty snug nest," he said admiringly. "Now, ain't it, Tilda? I tell you, by November, we'll be glad to sit round a good fire inside those walls." Tilda Jane smiled, and drawing a roll of knitting from her apron pocket, began to heel one of Grandpa's woolen socks. "I'm getting this ready for winter," she said, holding it up. Hank looked round about them at the luxuriant vegetation of gardens, roadside, and river bank. This was a fertile little spot, one of the most fertile by the Ciscasset River, and it seemed strange, in the glowing beauty of this summer evening, to be thinking of winter storms and cold. "Hank," said 'Tilda Jane suddenly, "who are the Touraines?" And as she spoke, her eyes went from her knitting across the green hedge, separating them from their neighbour's house on the left, the Dollivers' pretty cottage. Hank always called it the Cottage of Gentility, and was in the habit of quoting in its connection Southey's lines in The Devil's Walk. He passed a cottage with a double coach house, a cottage of gentility, and he owned with a grin that his favorite sin is pride that apes humility. It certainly had a large stable and carriage house, and it certainly had been occupied mostly by broken-down gentlefolks. Captain Dolliver and his wife, who were going to leave it, had been what Hank called army folks and stuck up. They rarely associated with their neighbors, and the Dilsons had been glad to hear that they were to move away and live with a son. "The Touraines," repeated Hank, when 'Tilda Jane asked him the question. "The Touraines, bless the child. If anyone knows about them, your humble servant ought to. When their father died, Mr. Waysmith was left sole executor with precious little to execute. But there's a great to-do made about what there is, and he often sends me there on errands." "Is there a large family?" inquired 'Tilda Jane. "Medium, sissy, medium," and he smiled in amusement. "First, there's Aunt Melindy, the head of the family, a glorious old maid of 60, with one tiny crack in her worn-out brain. I was waiting for her in the parlor the other day, and opened a book of bird pictures. She ran in screaming and slammed the pages together, saying the birds would all fly away if I left the book open. I dare say that worried her," said 'Tilda Jane soberly. "Course it did, but she is such a good old soul that she soon forgave me. They're poor, you know, and she tries to save. Has only one tooth left in her head, carries the rest round, tied up in a corner of her handkerchief, hoping that a day will come when she can afford a set of artificials." "What a sore thing that must be," said 'Tilda Jane. "Can't any of her friends give her some teeth?" "She wouldn't have 'em, sissy. She's proud in her way." "Who are the rest of the family?" asked the young girl curiously. "Next to the aunt comes her nephew, Bertrand. He paints a little, plays a little, but don't bring in the dollars. They call him downtown. The general-purpose young saphead with the muskrat income and sealskin ambitions. You might give him a job painting the new house," said 'Tilda Jane benevolently. Hank hung his head over the back of his seat and began to laugh softly. "I can see myself offering Bertrand Touraine the job of painting our house. Wouldn't he stare a paralyzing stare?" "He paints pictures, sissy, not houses." "And he has a sister, hasn't he?" asked 'Tilda Jane, dropping her knitting and holding out her arms to Una, who was trying to crawl on her lap. "A sister? Yes, the dancing star, Denise, the will-o'-the-wisp, the admired of all the idle young fellows about town." "Is she idle, too?" "No, I don't think so. She's a gay, tricksy sort of girl, gives music lessons to help out their income. She's engaged to rich young Vereker, but his folks ain't willing for him to marry her 'cause she's poor. I don't know how they'll figure it out." Is that all the family? Asked Tilda Jane. No, there's a baby, half-sister to Denise and Bertrand. The cutest thing, about 2.5 years old. Won't talk a word, but tells you everything in dumb show. Then, beside the baby, there's the servant girl, old Faisal Merithu, the glummest, foxiest old party in Maine. Looks me up and down as if she didn't know how to class me. Calls me that young man. Isn't there anyone else in the family? No, except the dog, Mary Wags. What are you so particular about knowing all I have to say of the Touraines? 'Cause they're coming to live in that house, said 'Tilda Jane solemnly, and she pointed to the Dollivers' cottage. You don't mean to say so, exclaimed Hank, abandoning his lolling attitude and sitting up straighter. The Touraines are? Yes, Mr. Waysmith was here today with a young lady going over the cottage. I was away and you were away, but he saw Grandpa and Perletta, and he said the young lady would be willing to teach Perletta anything she wanted to know. Well, I declare, that beats me, exclaimed Hank. And Perletta said there was a little child with them, continued 'Tilda Jane with deep feeling, and it had blue eyes and curly hair. Just think, Hank, of living next door to what I've longed for all my life. They're all as pretty as a picture, said Hank, except Aunt Melindy and Faisal. I say, that's a great thing for Perletta, to have a young lady like Miss Touraine teach her. Do you think Perletta will ever make much of herself, Hank? Asked 'Tilda Jane wistfully. Hank looked all round him as if fearful that someone might overhear. Do you know what Dad said to me last night about her? Said he, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Not elegant, but what's the case? And what did you say? Asked the little girl shrewdly. Said I, Dad, you can make silk purses out of anything nowadays. There ain't no limit to human ingenuity. 'Tilda Jane smiled. But now, Hank, do you really and truly think that Perletta could ever be what she wants to be? A real lady? She can be a real lady as far as goodness and proper behavior goes, said Hank. For she's certainly improving fast, but she's got to get that silly idea of having white hands knocked out of her head, and I guess the dancing star is just the one to knock it out. She'll razzle-dazzle you till you don't know where you are. I have no idea of being anything but a good housekeeper, said 'Tilda Jane steadily, and loving my neighbor, and not being tricky, and trying to eat right and act right, and not have to fight. A jumpy life frightens me. Hank tittered. You can fight in the open or in the underbrush. If you're hard-pressed, but you don't enjoy it, I'll tell you what, Tilda, it would be a fine thing if Miss Touraine would teach you with Perletta. You'd like it better than going to school, and she's had a fine education. I know, for I've seen the bills. I'd love that, said 'Tilda Jane, with ill-concealed joy. Is she fresh from school? Yes, she's only 19. She's been in New York and Europe and I don't know where. I guess Mr. Waysmith must have paid for it all. He and her father were great chums. Tilda, we'll find out about this teaching when Miss Touraine comes, but mind now, you go slow when they move in. I'm scared of these falling aristocrats. They're like mules, and often give you a kick when you least expect it. You've a good heart, and will be inclined to trot over with offers of help. You let me run things." "All right, Hank," said the young girl meekly. End of chapter 26. Recording by John Brandon.